Most basic, what does a lobby firm do?
Well, what a lobby firm does is it typically has clients. And in the private sector, I would say those clients tend to be regulated by the government or want a change in policy by the government, but there always has to be a government component. And what we do for our clients is we help them to engage with the government to put forth policies and proposals that are either new or changes to existing policy.
Yeah, you're right. And why is lobbying necessary for democracy?
Well, I think it's very important, especially in the United States, when you have a government that has a constitution that says the government is supposed to be for and by the people, and not, policies should not be determined and designed just by 435 people. The people in the United States should have a voice, and lobbying, advocacy, provides that voice for people, including, companies and non-governmental organization and coalition and, other, not non-commercial entities that want to impact the government.
So in the end, it's about giving existence or support to the constitutional right of petitioning before the authorities. Yeah,
that's right. In the U.S. Constitution, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution and what is known as the Bill of Rights. And within the Bill of Rights, there is a right to petition the government. It's gotten maybe a lot more elaborate in some ways, but at its core, it's pretty basic. You have something that you want the government to be aware of, and you want the government to either adopt a policy or change a policy.
And what's your answer when you see that someone say that it's not fair that big corporations are able to hire a lobby firm and small groups or individuals are not able to do that because of costs reasons? So there is any inequality issue there? What's your answer for that?
Well, political elected leaders are very, very sensitive to the actions that they take on behalf of financial interest, whether they be corporate interest or just wealthy individuals. Because in the end, people are not elected because of corporate support. They're elected because the people in their state or in their district, a majority of them vote for them. And that only happens, I believe, if the leader is perceived to care about their constituencies and actually adopt policies that help their constituencies. For those people who are viewed as only enacting policies that promote corporate interest against an individual's interest, I don't think they're elected for very long. So I understand that there is a perception that if a corporation has money and they hire lobbyists, that policies change. But I don't think that's a correct perception. I think there's a much more balanced approach within Congress, because you may have some congressional people that in the United States, again, that only want to promote a view of a particular corporation or group of corporations. But they have to convince a majority of people in the House and then a majority of people in the Senate that that exclusive policy for that corporation is the best policy. And that just doesn't happen.
You're right. You're right. So the system itself balanced that initial inequality in some way.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
And what is the role of traditional and social media in a lobby strategy? How do you use them?
That's a very, very good question, because if anything has evolved rapidly, it's the role of social media in a lobbying strategy. It can be an asset, or it can be the thing that destroys the strategy. So it's still a new tool. I think people use it to get to demonstrate that they have support for a particular policy or a particular program, or they use it to attack that particular policy and program. But I think it can be a very volatile tool if not used carefully. The role of traditional media has been a little bit more essential and a little less volatile, because for example, if you're trying to change a national policy and you go to, say, the print media in every state in the United States, and you try to get that editorial board to write a favorable piece, you are then influencing, the constituency in Detroit or in San Francisco or in Los Angeles or in Miami. And it's very solid, and it's part of an advocacy campaign. And I think elected officials, if they see in their state that all the newspapers are in favor of something, that gives them much more of a platform and an idea where they should be on an issue than somebody's Twitter account or somebody's Facebook account, right? So I think it's a tool that people have to use judiciously, and it's one that has to be really, really vetted, especially with all the questions that are being raised about bots, and nobody knows how real it is and how much it will impact.
That's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about regulation. Regulation of lobbying. In the U.S., there's a pretty solid regulation and comprehensive in many ways. What do you think about the way in which lobby is regulated, and give us your opinion about what would be an ideal regulation of lobbying?
So, I think that the United States does a pretty good job of regulating our industry. Its fundamental premise is disclosure. And so, when we are lobbying on behalf of a client and advocating, we have to register with both the House of Representatives and the Senate. We have to file every time that we meet with somebody. We have to indicate, and now we also have to indicate our own financial contributions, maybe to the member of Congress or senator. And so it's fundamentally all about disclosure. So the person you're talking to knows what you're doing. And then people in the United States who are doing research, they know what you're doing too. And I think that's very good. I think there are ways that it can be improved. For example, if there were more linkages with the campaign contributions of the client and the lobbying. So I don't think lobbying is as much an impediment to a fair or level playing field as campaign contributions are. And right now it's very hard to know how much money is going into somebody's campaign who may want something from that particular representative or senator. So if there were more linkages and more transparency on those, I think it would be good. The other change that I think should happen in the United States is really about leadership. And I'll give you an example. When the president of the United States, as happened recently when President Obama, when they hold lobbying out as something that is bad and say they're not going to hire anybody who was a lobbyist, what happens is everybody who is a lobbyist, although we didn't do this, then tries to figure out a way registering as a lobbyist. And so, you know, leadership matters because it then undermines the very foundation of the law, which is disclosure. So, you know, it's fine if presidents don't want to hire certain individuals because they may have represented, you know, a company or an NGO, right? Whatever. But to make it a cause, to make it, you know, to give it the imprimatur of the presidential, you know, mantle, then just basically puts the, you know, forces people in the sector to kind of go underground. And that's just not helpful because it's not promoting disclosure. And really, it's so important to have that disclosure. So I think both leadership and then linkages would make the law better.
Yeah, talking about leadership, sometimes it's tempting for leaders to stigmatize lobbying
Right.
For populist reasons, and that's why they are approaching our profession that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And talking about you know, populists or real politics, what is going on in the U.S. now? How is the political situation?
My God, it's so sad right now. I mean, we are, you know, we are in a terrible situation with the pandemic. And unfortunately, we have a lack of national leadership about what to do. There are certain things that should be done that aren't being promoted. And you know, it's a very sad time in the United States, and people are dying who, you know, maybe otherwise would not be dying at that time. I think, you know, the election is about 4 months away. And President Trump is not doing very well. He is, well, of course, down in the polls, but, you know, polls are a snapshot, as you know, a moment in time. And so things could change, but his is not looking very good. Is you know, politics is all about trends, right? So we had a situation, a very close election in 2016 that was mired in Russian bots and voter suppression, and then the trends since then in our elections in 2017, 2018, and off-year elections in 2019, the trends have all been against the president's party, and, you know, in a vote against the president himself, as he put himself on the ballot in many of these midterm elections. So I think the latest ABC Washington Post poll came out today. His approval rating is like 38%. His polling nationally is against former Vice President Biden is very low. I think former Vice President Biden is ahead in double digits right now, and he's ahead above the margin in error in almost every key, you know, in almost every key state in the United States Electoral College. You know, because we don't vote by popular vote yet in the United States, and so that, you know, that leaves, you know, anywhere from 6 to 10 states that are always hotly contested. And in every one of those states right now, the vice president is up above the margin of error.
Wow. So in the end, it looks like a leadership crisis in some ways. There is no strong candidate that people prefer or support and trying to and are allowed to support in the next few months. We are going to need to see how it evolves.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I think, you know, I think Vice President, what the polls show is that people believe very strongly that Vice President Biden would do a very good job leading the country through this crisis. His numbers is over 50%.
Oh.
In that category. And in other categories. So people believe Vice President Biden would be a very good leader in terms of the systemic racism, uprooting the systemic racism in our country, which, as you know, over the almost the same months of pandemic has been a crisis. So I think it looks very good for Vice President Biden right now. Things can change, as we get closer to the election. There'll be more contraction in the polls, but I don't see anything right now that would result in President Trump being reelected. His numbers are too low. He is not help himself. And most people see him as a failed leader as far as the pandemic is concerned and as far as our racial crisis is concerned. And right now, those two things are driving the election, and people do not see his leadership at all in those two areas.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Karen, thank you very much. It was very, very helpful, very interesting to have your views, and we hope we have a chance to meet you again in a few months to have your views on the U.S. politics.
Anytime. Thank you so much, Juan. So good to see you.
So good.
Take care.
Okay, we are